Welcome to the Monday, February 6th Education Committee and Supplementary Regular Meeting of the Board of School Directors. I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Copeland.
Thank you, Dr. Van Lynch. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Education Committee meeting. We have two agenda items this evening, two presentations to make. The first one is the third of a series of presentations that the curriculum folks have made around making sense of the performance profile and data. Each fall, the Pennsylvania Department of Education puts out information on student performance, testing, and frankly, on what's generally a limited look at our schools, which is state testing. They don't put out data on many other important things that take place in a child's day. And all too often we find that the media and folks just take a look at a number and say, well, that number is up or down, and therefore the school is up or down. And so we wanted to take some time to really delve into the numbers and show people the complexity. And I think the staff has done an outstanding job, really. This is a better presentation than I've seen anywhere, and really going through these issues. So let me turn it over to Dr. Everslag. So with that introduction, this better be really good, Doctor.
Thank you for that pressure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to the Education Committee of the Board. We are pleased to share with you part 3 of our data presentation, as Mr. Copeland shared, on making sense of our state data. We have presented this information publicly a number of times, and the third portion of our presentation is specifically related to growth and other academic indicators rooted in the root of our SPP score. So we've kind of rooted all 3 of the presentations based on the SPP score, which is the school performance profile score that's given to each school annually by the state, and looked at the different aspects of that score. We started with understanding the SPP score and transitioned to the achievement data, gap data, and now we're focusing on our growth data and our other academic indicators. So a few summary points for part 3 of the presentation that we'll explain as we go through the presentation tonight. I would say up front that conceptually, frequently people have difficulty grasping growth data more so than the achievement data, just because it's a different way to look at data than what many of us had growing up. But there are really aspects of the growth data that help us better understand the achievement data and vice versa. So it's one data point that works in combination with many others to help us get a really accurate picture of where students are, where our programs are. One aspect of data, the growth data, that's really important is that achievement data is correlated with non-school factors such as socioeconomic status and early schooling experiences, but there's typically little or no relationship between demographics and student growth data. And so as a result of that, when we look at our student growth data, there are a lot of, it provides us with new ways to look at our data and new insights, such as specific student subgroups, many of which are not, from when looking at achievement, scoring the level that we would hope, but when looking at their growth, are showing signs of growth that we're very pleased with. And vice versa, we see areas of students that, when looking at our proficiency percentages or our achievement data, students may not be showing the growth that we had hoped, although the achievement may be high. The SPP metrics regarding the other category is an area of strength for our schools, in part because of our strong curricular offerings and policies that support college preparation. And throughout the presentations, we have shared some examples of how we as a school district have responded to the data. I don't want by any means the impression to be that we look at growth data independent of achievement data. They're looked at together and analyzed kind of an ongoing basis with not only achievement and growth data from the state, but benchmark and local assessments where we can make strong decisions and informed decisions about students and our programs based on looking at the data as a whole. So some examples of some responses that we have shared throughout the presentations have been text-dependent analysis action plan. We've responded with some middle school math benchmarks and looked at our curriculum audit. Started data teams at the middle school with around areas of math. And our principals are engaged in building level learning plans and superintendent reports that they share with the superintendent and me multiple times throughout the year. Those reports are filled with data that's a combination of the growth, achievement, and local data. And as a result of those, the supervisors and the building principals and all of us work together to form instructional and professional learning priorities. So we're proud that those decisions are data informed. We also understand that there is a great level of complexity to understanding this data, and that necessitates the need to look at this on an ongoing basis. And I obviously want to reiterate the point that the school performance profile, while it is important and gives us valuable information, certainly does not tell the whole story of any school experience. So the growth data and the SBP scores that we'll be talking about today, just as a reminder, is solely based on the state assessment, the PSSA in grade 3 through 8, the Keystone exams in the high schools. That any measurement of growth is a measurement of growth on those assessments, not measurements of growth in other areas, which we certainly value as a district. We do encourage you to look at the public profile, just to see the school performance profiles of any school within the district. You'll see numbers that look similar to this. There'll be numbers and triangles and squares and colors that will associate signs of growth. And we hope that through some of the resources that we provided, you better understand what goes into those numbers. And as a quick refresher, conceptually, the SPP score is based on 4 categories. We will be focusing mostly on the growth category and the other category, which makes up about 50% of the school's SPP score. And we do encourage you to access a handout that's available online on understanding the school performance profile. It's an annotated sheet that helps kind of explain the different components of the score report and helps the public be informed of what contributed to those scores. So let's take a closer look at growth and what it means for our scores in our schools. The growth portion of the report is located on the first page, the bottom part of the report, and it accounts for 40% of a school's SPP score. So within that category, each school has a growth score in math and English language arts and in science. And those, similar to achievement, are weighted more heavily towards growth in ELA. So the best way that a school can show improvement in this area as reflected in their SPP score is for students to collectively show growth in the area of English and language arts. So when you think about growth measurement, it's very statistically driven. It's a way to statistically determine if students performed as they were expected to, considering their testing history and performance patterns of all students across the state. So students that are included in the growth data for any school are students that have testing history in the state. If they're new to the state, if they just came to us from a private school and they don't have any testing history, their scores would not be calculated in the school's growth scores. And growth is much more than simply gauging if a student moved from one category of performance to another. In fact, I would encourage you to shift beyond that because frequently we get caught up in proficiency percentages as an indicator of growth, and that has some flaws to that. We typically think of achievement as and limit our conversations about achievement to the 4 performance categories: advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic. When in reality, we know that policymakers determined cut scores to differentiate between those categories. So the example that I like to share that helps us understand this is if we were to assume that all of us were a class of students, and we all performed on the state assessment, and whatever our score would be, whatever category we would have each have fallen into, and then we came back the following year and we all took the same assessment again, but we all scored a little bit less and our growth score was down. We typically wouldn't be happy with that, because we wouldn't have shown the growth that we would like. However, if one person moved into our class and that student was proficient, our overall proficiency percentage in our class would have improved. Therefore, it could be easy for someone to look at our scores and say, oh, this group of students' proficiency improved, therefore they must be doing better. That would be a flawed conclusion to draw, when we truly wouldn't be happy with the fact that all of us had not shown the growth. So you have to look at the two in conjunction with one another, and we have to look at individual students when we are making plans about students, but be careful to draw any quick conclusions based on strictly proficiency percentages. As we dive deeper into the achievement cut scores, regardless of whether it's the PSSA or the Keystone scaled scores, there is a range of possible scores. These numbers are not that important for the public to know, even for students to know. What is important to know from this is that there is a wide range of scores that a student could fall into, even if they're in the advanced category. So if you look at the bottom chart and look at algebra in the below basic range, anywhere from 1200 to 1438 would result in a score of below basic. That's a much wider range than the basic range, which is 1439 to 1499. Proficient range is small, only 45 points, and then the advanced range is much larger. And so one myth that typically accompanies the idea of growth is that as students are maybe high performing students are scoring in the advanced range, that there is not room for growth, and that too is not accurate. So there is room for students to grow regardless of what proficiency category they may have fallen into, and regardless of their testing history. So if we think of PVOS growth, it's really it's a different type than achievement, and it's shows whether a student has improved or gone down based on their projections, and that's coded in the SPP scores with a color code. Dark blue being the best, down to red, which is showing the least amount of growth, and that's calculated for groups of students based on how they perform in relationship to their statistical prediction. PVOS is an established statistical model for calculating the difference between their growth and their projection that helps them fall into a category a growth score that would result in one of these categories. Students that score right in the green range, that means they're meeting their trajectory of growth. So within each performance category, we would have students that have growth all across the board. We'd have students in the advanced category that showed growth. We'd have students in the advanced category that did not show growth, and that's the same. That is true for every different performance category. I think this can be. We're going to look at some student and then school examples, but I think the student example can help kind of conceptualize this and make it a little more concrete. So the growth score for a student is based on the differences in their actual student score and statistically derived their expected score. So if you were to look at the visual chart in the top right and follow the red line, you can see the students' growth over the last, or performance over the last 6 school years, six times the student tested. This is an actual student in our district who has been with us since kindergarten, and their 6-year testing history. Just by looking at the visual, that would line up with the NCE, the normal curve equivalent, that would indicate whether or not a student showed growth in each of those years. If the student were to go up, their NCE score would go up, and they would have positive growth. So you can see over the past 6 years, this student is certainly trending upward, but had some years where their growth scores would not have met the projection of the previous year. The next column is next row, I should say, is percentile, and the percentiles tell how well a student performed in comparison to other students in the state who took the same exam. So you can see this student's percentile is also similar to the NCE, going up and occasionally dipping, but certainly trending upward. Certainly from 2011 to 2016, showed a significant. Not significant, that's not the statistical term significant, so a great deal of growth. But this final column is really the column that is quite honestly the most perplexing and can leave parents and students scratching their heads. And that is, if I'm a parent and I receive this a report on how my child did over the last 6 years, I would see that this child 4 years in a row scored in the advanced category, and then suddenly in 2015 scored in the basic performance category, which typically could be alarming. And if you look at the other data and the growth data, you can see that is a result of a change of cut score. It happened to be the year that they changed the test, but percentile-wise and state NCE-wise, the student showed growth. So it's perplexing to say the least. But that's the difference. Is that's an arbitrary score that's determined by policymakers. The growth can be measured over time using state NCE, even if they change the test. That's the value of the NCE, the normal curve equivalent, being part of the growth formula. So let's take a look at our school summaries. If you go to the public site that was linked to this presentation, there are a lot of ways for the public to view the school's growth data and the school's achievement data. One way that we think kind of captures it the best is to look at it on a scatter plot. And scatter plots basically tell us, by looking at a single point on a scatter plot, can look at where a school scores in relationship to other schools in the state, but also a combination of their growth and their achievement. So the quadrant in the top right is your optimal quadrant. That's high achievement, high growth. The bottom left is low achievement, low growth. You can see the others. So clearly you want to be above the horizontal x-axis with higher achievement, and you want to have as much growth as you possibly can. So the PSSA math, there are 8 X's on this scatter plot, and the 8 X's represent our 8 middle and elementary schools, and you can see where they fall in the scatter plot of growth and achievement in relationship to the other schools. Every dot on this scatter plot, it's quite crowded as you can see, represents a school in Pennsylvania. So as reported last presentation, we talked about our achievement. Our achievement continues to be very high. You see a couple of those X's as 2 of the top 3 performing schools in the state. But when we look at this data, even some of our high-performing schools, or schools overall, are high-performing from the achievement standpoint. There are areas of growth that have raised some concerns, and so. It would be foolish of us just to look at an X that's very high on the chart, but in the upper left quadrant, and not dig into that deeper to understand where areas of concern and growth may be for our program. This is our PSSA English Language Arts, and the distribution is relatively similar, a little closer to the center. That center line in the center that's a school that the exit's right on the line, high achievement, and right on their trajectory for growth. So that school as a whole met their growth trajectory. Now the Keystone scores are not reported like they are with the achievement. So last month when I talked about the achievement score, the achievement scores are reported as Keystone as the 11th grade best score of all class of 2017, so juniors of class of 2016. This year's seniors, last month reported their best score by the time they were juniors. This scatter plot shows the test participants last year. This is not juniors' best score, and test participants last year who have testing history. So you might initially ask, well, why is our number closer to that horizontal axis for this than it is for the other scores? Well, we had a very small number of our students take the Algebra 1 test last year. It was about 150 students in the entire district, and those were students who were retesting in Algebra 1 or were first-time test takers. So it was a low number of participants. If we cannot generate, the program doesn't generate a scatter plot for junior best score, but your junior best scores obviously would be much higher. So while you may initially show this as perhaps being, and perceive this as disappointing, I see this and see that X above the proficiency cut score, which is 1,500, and being a group of students, many of whom are retesters, that's where we want the score to be. We want it to be above the proficiency line, and we want the growth to be in that upper right quadrant. If you look at our Keystone Biology scores are really outliers in the state, with a tremendous amount of growth shown by both high schools, and high achievement, high growth. So this is close to an optimal distribution on a scatter plot for our biology scores. Our literature scores, again, very high. This is similar to some of the questions that were raised during looking at the PSSA ELA scores, and really the root of some of our text-dependent analysis action plans have been to try to get the growth where we want it to be, despite there being very high achievement of our literature test participants. So if you look across the numbers on the bottom of this chart, they're called the average growth index. As I'd said, 0 being a school that met trajectory. The average growth index is the number that helps us translate the score into the SPP score. So the schools that would score a 3 or higher on the average growth index, that would be the biologies, for example, are going to clearly be dark blue with their growth. So bless you. So the further right that we were on the scatter plot, the higher the average growth index would be, and that would be translated to a color, which would allow for a scale score to be part of the formula for SPP. So just in quick summary, a score of 80 or more on this as a multiplier for this metric shares that this school is showing growth. A score of 70 to 79 would be that this school is just meeting their trajectory. So really, to get max score, all of your students have to be in the light blue. Not all of your students. Your school as a whole has to be in the light blue, dark blue category. One thing that's interesting and important to note about this is we've talked about students that have maybe in the lower achievement performance categories, and those are the students that we reported last meeting that they're part of our district's achievement gap, certainly an issue that we have focused a lot of energy on and will continue to. But if students that are in a particular subgroup score in if they only score at the green level or at they meet their trajectory, that will be insufficient at closing our achievement gap. So one of the major complexities of closing the gap is that the students that are scoring in the below basic category or in basic category, they really, for us to truly close the achievement gap, is an ongoing challenge for those students to score consistently in light blue or dark blue. Pleased to report that those are subgroups that have underperformed historically were some of our best growth data reports from this past testing session. So that is a sign of a celebration and something that we will continue to try to move toward. That does not always result in a change of proficiency category. And so looking at the growth is every bit as important as looking at the achievement, looking at them together to determine achievement gap. And then just finally, the final metric would be 50 to 69 as a multiplier if a school were not showing the growth that they were projected to show. So the final category on the SPP score is only worth 10 points, and that's the other category. And I'll move through this really quickly because all schools receive full credit for the promotion rate, attendance rate, which is the first 10 points of the other category. And then, I'm sorry, the first 5 points with the promotion rate, and then attendance rate. Again, there were no surprises or concerns in those for our buildings. And our final part of the calculation for SPP score is the cohort graduation rate, attendance rates, AP, IB, dual enrollment, and PSAT participation. And again, there were no surprises and no concerns in those categories. So, in summary to this part of the presentation, achievement data certainly gives us a lot of information, but we have to look at it in conjunction with growth data. A reminder that there's typically little to no relationship between demographic and student growth data. Therefore, we have held the expectation that every student will grow. Certainly, we have the expectation that students will achieve, but looking at student growth and celebrating that student growth is important as we look at coming up with action plans for students and looking at data as a whole. And our responses and our action plans that have resulted and formulated near the beginning of the year and have been revised multiple times since, their input into those reports is look at a wide range of data sets, growth data, achievement data, local data together, and not looking at those in isolation. And I would suggest that if your data goals are singularly focused, that your plan is somewhat flawed. And so one of the things that Mr. Copeland has challenged the principals and the curriculum team to do is to really constantly seek causation into what may be contributing to scores, what may be contributing to performance, and seek to try to find ways to help improve the situations. And while I hope people better understand the SPP score, I also hope they don't overemphasize the SPP score. We value it, we value the information, but it certainly doesn't define us as a school or as a district.
Thanks, Scott.
Sure.
In the beginning, when I first met the staff, one of the quotes that I often used from a coach, but he coached for San Francisco, so I won't mention his name. But he wrote a book, and it said, "The score takes care of itself." And so I think if we build the curriculum and build a program, we're not here to chase a score. And I think there's been the district and others have rightly criticized the use of assessment tests for high-stakes testing, for evaluations of staff. But that's not the fault of the test. The test, it's the fault of the people who make policy decisions and use it in ways that aren't helpful. I think that the data, however, can shed light on things that we're concerned about. Writing skills, text-dependent analysis, how you read, these are lifelong, incredibly important skills, and it's reasonable to make sure that we perform in ways that support our students. So this is and we're constantly aware that this is not all of school. And one of the things that we're sometimes frustrated with, often frustrated with, particularly in a district that values the kinds of art, music program that we do, world language program, and the richness of experience, none of that shows up in these school performance profiles. I would also caution that one of the things that happens whenever you label a child or a school with a single number is you suggest that that's who they are. You're an 80 student, you're a 90 student. No, you're a student, and you're not an 80 or 90 school. And I hope that the complexity of this data shows that while we can use it appropriately, it doesn't stand alone.
Thank you for the presentation. Just a formal acknowledgement and thank you to the curriculum team and the curriculum committee of the board for having the foresight to break this up, because there's clearly a lot of information that we need to digest and make sense in terms of what that looks like for our students in instructional strategies as well as the outcomes that we desire for all of them. So with that, thank you on behalf of myself and the board, and let me open it up to questions. Please, Dr. O'Leary.
Thank you for the presentation, for the encore version for the presentation, because we did talk about it during curriculum at the last meeting. And I want to thank your entire team for really looking at this through the lens of what's important for kids' education as opposed to what's important for state testing purposes. And I think you guys have done a really good job of keeping that priority. My question was, you showed us the growth at school level, and my question was, are there any trends that you've seen in terms of digging into individual grades, classes, types of students, high performing, low performing, or are there other trends that you saw in the data that weren't in the sort of gross level school data?
Well, there are a lot of ways to look at the data, and principals have access to certain reports, the teacher-specific reports. We have access to those as well, but like from the curriculum team lens, we're looking at more district-wide trends. I will say that the part of the SPP score is in fact a multiplier in the teacher evaluation system, and there are also 3-year averages for students. That this is the first year, 3-year averages for 3-year averages. I'm sorry, for teachers who are attributed to a certain subgroup or certain testing category. So, for example, 10th grade English teachers are attributed to a 3-year average of students that that contribute to that they've taught, that have taken the keystones. That is also a multiplier in their teacher evaluation. So that's led to some conversations, both positive and raising some questions at the building level. It is data that we look at, but the curricular trends and looking at some areas of whether we have some quintile groups that may not be showing the growth that we had hoped had led to not led to necessarily strictly linearly, but contributed to the conversations about us engaging in things like unit upgrades, us expecting a different level of depth and research from students in writing, us looking at a text-dependent analysis and challenging students to write at a very deep level. Some of that is certainly generated from the growth data that we had, that we expected to be a little better in some areas.
Mr. Driscoll?
Yes, thank you for this presentation and trying to make sense of what this is. My question is, and I think I'm not understanding it, so my question will probably be wrong. That's why hopefully you can correct me. If a student is at the top of his or her proficiency, let's say 1545, like on slide 16, how can he or she show growth without, I guess, moving up to advanced? Is that, I don't know if I'm understanding that correctly. That's why, if you're at the top of proficient, don't you need to be advanced at some point in order to show growth? And is that now muddying the waters between growth and achievement. Is that question, first of all, the question makes sense, or am I kind of out in left field?
It does
here?
make sense.
Okay,
but,
thank you.
But so I'll try to answer it, and I'll ask Dr. Paul if she can, or Mr. Cody if they want to add to this. But your growth score is relationship to the projection and of you versus the group, how you're statistically projected as the group. So your score could go up, and you still only achieve a green or met your projection. Doesn't necessarily mean that the cut score improves. So the student example might be a better visual of this, where even looking at the students, because the cut score is I don't want to say not completely arbitrarily determined, but it is in essence arbitrarily determined on some level by policymakers. Your percentile could go up, your NCE score could go up, your performance level could go down, and therefore the opposite is also true, although much less likely. Did I explain that accurately?
Hi, is this thing on? I also wanted to point out, it's a little deceiving. When you look at these individual student reports, it's showing an individual student's growth over time. However, when we're talking about the growth metrics, they are only calculated at a group level. So we don't actually have access to one particular student's growth measure or growth score. But the scores that we see are groups of students. So the sixth graders as a whole in one particular school or across the entire school district, or a subgroup of the sixth graders. So I don't know if that helps to clarify as well.
Ms. Pollard?
Again, ditto, thank you. I'm looking at slide number 21, and that might be the one that we're already on. And I know this is one individual student, but just looking at advanced, and then basic and then proficient, is that also like teenagers, we're becoming distracted maybe, or, I don't know.
Well, I think that always is something that has to be considered as a possibility. My guess is in this case, we're talking about that's the year that the test was changed.
Okay.
And when the test was changed, the cut scores were significantly changed, and we had the schools, much like every other school in the state, all of a sudden you had a much higher percentage of students who were not proficient, and that initially seemed alarming. When we look at the growth data and look at how students have done over time, the percentile-wise they were the same, but apparently in 2014, if you were in the 63rd percentile, you were advanced, and in 2000. And you could have your own thoughts about that as well. But in 2015,
65.
even 65% is basic. And so, I think that part of the thought behind that was we're going to, as we've heard policymakers say before, we're going to raise the bar, and that's going to allow students to, and excuse me if any sarcasm came through that, but that was that would be a difference maker for students, and it actually made interpretation of the data much more challenging for districts.
And I know you had said before, this doesn't lift up race or gender or things like that. But when I'm looking at this from an African American standpoint of view, this, in my opinion, hurts the outcome of the African American scores on these types of tests. And I don't know, is that?
Well, I mean, if you were to look at our, and again, looking at subgroup data, and our African American students did not meet the proficiency needs that we had hoped, and that had a negative impact on our SPP score. That subgroup did not negatively impact our growth scores. That subgroup improved our growth scores. And so that's one of the good things about this formula that is an improvement in some ways over what we used to do, is it does factor in those growth scores. And so we actually had, in some tested areas, some pockets of really high achieving students that historically had scored in the advanced range not meet their growth. Those students hurt our scores more than a subgroup of students that was below basic and showing growth. So
I think one of the reasons, though, that you showed this particular one, this is particularly interesting because you can see if you follow the percentiles for 2014, 2015 look, relatively flat, and then jump at 2016. But the NCE, the normal curve equivalent, basically says that from 2014, where the student was advanced, to 2015, the outcome was virtually the same. And I think, that's why we're saying, there's a certain danger may be too strong a word, but there should be some concern about putting too much significance on just, remember, these tests are a moment in time, given at a particular point in time. And when they can be triangulated to say, all right, so we showed some concern about some high school writing scores, had some conversation with high school graduates, had some conversations with high school teachers. We're putting a plan together around those kinds of things, not just, well, let's go chase this score.
And I'd argue that if you didn't do that, you'd look at our high school literature scores and be thrilled. If you didn't look at that other data, and that would be equally flawed.
Dr. Gilbert?
Thank you. I just want to take the time to thank you and the rest of the team for pulling all of this data together. It was a tremendous amount of work. I saw various versions, and I know how difficult this was to actually distill it in a manner that would help explain to the board and the community what these scores are and what they aren't. So I really want to congratulate you on that. We spent 3 curriculum committee meetings going over this in detail, and I know you've also presented at ISC and maybe other places as well. So I think one of the things that was really helpful for me was at the very beginning, in the first presentation, you talked about all the things that we care about in this district that are not actually covered, or not sort of encapsulated in these scores, and that was extremely helpful. So being able to hear about all the sort of rich curriculum we have, and co-curricular activities, and at all different levels. On page 5, or maybe slide 5, sorry, you list some of the examples, though, of ways in which the district is responding to this data in conjunction with other forms of data, and I think also in relation to our strategic planning process, so that some of this data is useful in helping us think through what we're doing. The text-dependent analysis action plan you've spoken about, and the middle school math curriculum issues. I'm wondering, these building level learning plans, can you maybe just say a little bit about what that is and give us some sense of how this data is being used in that way?
Sure. So the principals, we met with them in the summer and tasked them. This is something new, a new task for them. We've had building-based plans before. This was a learning plan that we wanted teachers to be really connected to. So principals met with teams of teachers in the elementary schools. It looked most of the elementary schools have 4 to 5 goals. These are grade level goals that they have constructed based on looking at a range of data points. So when they were constructing these, they had most of this data, but not all of the data. So hence why some of those plans have changed throughout the year. There's a causation piece to it. And again, the challenge to looking at the causation, and some kind of fluid goals, or goals that were established but have since been in some cases revised, to try to show areas address those areas of need. And so I think it's been a really successful process. You know, again, we've had actually conferences this week with principals, and it's allowed us to keep a better pulse along the way of what those areas of need and specify them by the building, because there are specific needs in different buildings.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Hackman?
I echo everything that everyone has said about the time and effort to communicate this to us and the public. Is this going to be easier to do next year?
Well, I sure
Now you
hope
just
so.
have the spreadsheet and you just zing it
This,
in, right?
I don't know that we will be quite as expansive. I know, you know, Homeland is back on, and I have a hard time deciding what to watch, either this presentation or but I think this was done so comprehensively that it'll be something we'll be referring people back to. I mean, the numbers will change, but things may change at the state also.
There were real advantages to doing this deliberately,
Right.
and looking at it multiple times from different perspectives that really revealed more than perhaps it would have if we had rushed it. So I think it will be helpful. I mean, this process has drawn on a little bit. We're almost ready to start testing again. So,
Yeah, I mean.
But I hope it's helpful.
I had a quick question. The question around the building level learning plan, Dr. Gilbert asked. But I wanted to ask Dr. Everslog, are there ways in which this data is useful for classroom teachers, and in what ways is it useful? Obviously, we're a year out by the time the scores get in, but how might teachers find benefit from looking at this data deeply in terms of the level in which we're looking at it?
So it is a challenge. It's certainly a challenge for trying to make it what it isn't, and I say that because we can't pretend that this data is valuable at all to the art teachers or the music teachers.
Sure.
So we don't even try to go there. It is helpful for English teachers. It is helpful certainly for math teachers. It's helpful to look at how because there is a level of attribution of students to the teacher, they can look at their groups of students that have been under their care and seen their growth patterns over time. That is helpful. That information can also be broken down by quintile. So how are your top quintile students growing as compared to your middle or bottom quintile students? But we have offered some, our curriculum team members and our principals have gone through some workshops on the interpretation of this. It is not readily accessible for teachers at their fingertips. We do have to, especially the PVOS part. The growth part is, I think, is the hardest for all, including the educators, to kind of wrap your head around. But I do think it has shown that there are a lot of capabilities of the system of PVOS that does help us from a programming standpoint. So I think the biggest advantage is really what we get at seeing the trends from the curriculum standpoint.
Dr. Paul, in the beginning of the year, went around to a lot of the schools and gave school-wide presentations to staff. There's also an opportunity to look. I mean, in a lot of cases, we said, "Wow, look at the kids who were who were challenged the most did really well," but we're concerned about kids who tended to be at the advanced, you know. And so, it does point you to a fuller look. The building learning plans, they're in their infancy. Really, an opportunity for the administration and the building level teachers to sit down and roll up their sleeves, but also forcing, not forcing, but making sure that central office supervisors are there to support the work that they do. Now that we feel that they've gotten some expertise in it, I'd like to see them present to their HSAs maybe twice a year, so that our parent communities can be partners in looking at this. I wanted them to sort of mess around on their own first, but traditionally this now moves to a pretty public look to say, here's our building level plans. We're looking at this on a regular basis, and we want you to join in and support. Sure, thank you. Thanks, Scott. Now, we also have a second presentation, and this is an opportunity to give really a two-part presentation. One, to share some updates on one of Lower Merion's longest-running community partnerships, the CARE Committee, along with the sort of action arm of the CARE Committee, our Achievement Task Force. So, do you have a slide? You want to introduce your co-chair?
Sure. Hello again. Welcome, Ms. Lynn Partridge, with us this evening. Ms. Partridge is an assistant principal at Penn Wynne and Marion Elementary, and she has been a long-standing an original member of the CARE Committee, and she is our chairperson of the CARE Committee. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we've talked about some of our data the last few meetings, and we talked about our achievement data and our achievement gap data last meeting, and certainly some of the responses that we've done from educationally to try to address the gap. But we're also addressing the gap in other ways, as we should be. And that one of those is through these two committees, the CARE and the Achievement Imperative Task Force. I'm proud to say that our district has been at the forefront of addressing the achievement gap. We've been talking about it for a long time, to the point that I know that we have to challenge ourselves never to get tired of that conversation while that gap exists. Two quotes that I have up on the screen are, they're old and they're intentionally old. First is from Richard Riley in 2001, who was the Secretary of Education in 2001, talking about the achievement gap and it being a gaping hole in our commitment to fulfilling the American promise. He sent that as in his Dear Colleague letter to all the districts at that time in 2001. And to this day, it's still a pressing area of need, and we have not, as a nation, nor as a district, shown the growth that we would have hoped in the achievement gap. We have small successes. We have successes that we are very proud of, but it would be disingenuous to say that we're anywhere near where we would want to be. It is a persistent challenge in American education, and certainly one for the district. We know that there are a tremendous number of school-based factors that contribute to student outcomes, including but not limited to instructional practices, teacher quality, teacher experience, and teacher attendance, guaranteed and viable rigorous curriculum, school safety, class size, systematic equity, policy practice. There are certainly a lot of areas of the school district that touch the achievement gap, and it's our ethical responsibility to explore all those factors. I am proud of the fact that I think we look at this from multiple angles and continue to value things like class size and challenge ourselves to make sure we're looking at things equitably across the district to try to do what we can to address achievement gaps. But we have to always be looking at any factors that we can control, that are within our school control, to help eradicate the gap. So Ms. Partridge is going to speak to us a little bit about our CARE Committee, which has been around since 1997, and Lynn's a founding member. So Lynn.
Thank you, Scott, and good evening. When I realized around since a founding member. I realized it started back in 1996 when Superintendent David McGill was approached by a group of community members who were really concerned about the experiences of their children. Community members from our African American neighborhoods of Ardmore and Bryn Mawr, respectively. And it was before 2002, before No Child Left Behind, but the concerns really encapsulated and defined what we've come to be known as the achievement gap. And I was part of that original group of Black educators that Dr. McGill gathered and tasked with taking a look at this. And after 2 hours, we realized we were not going to solve the problems of race in America within that 2 hours. And that began what is now a 20-year journey in taking a look at and addressing issues of race in education. And I am honored and thrilled to be a part, continue to be a part of our district's effort. Our CARE committee originally started a year after the parents began, and so we came together in '97, and we included administrators. Originally, we were some staff members, school board members, and a few administrators, and we met at the home of a school board person, Frida Outlaw. Over these years, we have grown and extended until we include almost all of our administrators from academic council, as well as beyond parents and community members, and we meet monthly. Our mission in CARE was established about 5 or 6 years ago, where the group came together, because after about 5 years, we realized, what is our goal? What is our mission? What are we doing? We felt like in those early years, we were still peeling back the onion and trying to figure out what was the achievement gap and what was our part in helping to solve it. And so the mission was established to sort of give us a direction. And so just sort of summarize it for you. First and foremost, it was to support the needs of our African American students and to help them achieve to their fullest potential, to be a resource for schools, to uncover and address issues that pertain to race and education, to review, and in doing that, to review the literature, raise the consciousness of our community beyond those neighborhoods, but our entire Lower Merion community about the impact of racism, to represent all of the stakeholder groups, and most importantly, to be a vehicle for change. CARE's goal in addressing the achievement gap is, our goals for this year in particular were based in part upon an opportunity I had last summer to attend the Summer Institute in Closing the Achievement Gap at Harvard University. And the 4 strands that I took away from that week's work represent things that we had been doing here in Lower Merion previously, and things that we really want to focus on. And so those 4 strands were engaging parents and families. That's something that we started with CARE, but it continues to be a challenge to figure out ways to do that, to make those partnerships even stronger. Using data to set priorities. I think you've heard quite a bit about our efforts with data. Ensuring high expectations and encouraging a growth mindset. We've often said, yes, high expectations matter, yeah, but what exactly does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like for the student and for the staff? And to foster supportive peer cultures for our students. As I joined this effort with CARE, having had a long-range view of it, I realized that our work in CARE can't just be once a month at our 2-hour CARE meeting, that it has to be integrated with all of the other district initiatives that we undertake as well. Our strategic plan, I had the opportunity to be, I feel, an architect of that, having served on the steering committee as well as the writing team. And I brought my lens of care to that work, but I also see many connections with our concerns and our goals for care within the strategic plans pathways. Spirit of community is obvious. Student-driven learning and transformative curriculum are all pathways that speak directly to closing the achievement gap for all of our students. This year, we're focusing on the instructional strategies of Marzano 9, which are really 9 high-yield strategies for impacting achievement. And so the other things that we're doing within the district inform and definitely have an impact on what we do in care. And most importantly, care, we attempt to foster the community engagement and communication by providing this venue where we can take a look at what's going on at a local level and a national level, and uncover some of these issues around race and think about how do these issues impact our children in schools and our families and our community. Our topics and themes for care for this current year are really evolve around our stakeholders. And we have 2 distinct groups in that room. On the one hand, we have parents and community members, and on the other we have administrators. And there is some overlap, and what's important is that for all of those stakeholders, the goal is the same, for our students to achieve at the high level. But what I've found and what I've learned is the way that we approach it and go about it may be differently. And so for our parents and community members, talking about and uncovering and exploring issues of race, issues of current events that are going on at a national level as well as at a local level, really serve to expose the realities, improve a window into the lives of our families, and help our administrators think about ways that impacts the learning in the schools. And so what I call that is, why do we do this? So at every one of our meetings, we have 2 parts. The first part is cultural proficiency, courageous conversations, where we're exploring why do we need to do this. The second part is, okay, so now what do we do about it? And so the other part of our theme is really around thinking about the strategies and the action steps. And so our next slide really shows sort of an overview of where we've been this summer. And so we have the 2 columns, discussions and courageous conversations, that the why do we do this? Those activities will often be prompted by sometimes a video, sometimes an article, often an in-depth sharing, and just coming together and exploring topics, whether in September, thinking about this. It seems like every summer recently, there's always some hot button issue. So we began talking about the Tulsa, Oklahoma shootings and the national anthem controversy. Thinking about that, looking at within that room, what are our different perspectives on it, and then to the end of thinking about how does this impact our students. And what came out of that was a thoughtful change in our approach to the national anthem. We all say the pledge every day in schools, but thinking about the controversy, and for some of our students who really embrace that, we made a very subtle change. We now say, instead of saying please stand for the pledge, we say we now invite you to stand. to allowing for those students who feel really strongly, about that controversy to have room and space to do that. So that was our why do we need to do this conversations. And then for the second part, our strategies and action steps, it was an in-depth beginning to look at high expectations. Again, it's not just, oh yes, I have high expectations for my students, but what does that look like in the classroom? What does that look like for students? What does that feel like and sound like? And so we had handouts from my Harvard experience that sort of shaped and let us dig a little bit more deeply into that. Moving into October, we took a look at privilege and race. And when you look at critical race theory, the notion of privilege is rampant. There's a classic article by Peggy McIntosh about white privilege. And when you talk about in the room, when you show a video about that, you can sense a discomfort because in most people's minds, privilege is equated with entitlement. And and intentional entitlement. And the notion of privilege in terms of race is very different. It's really about unintended advantage based on a color to the disadvantage of other groups. And so we took some time to really unpack that to help everybody in the room sort of share a common knowledge about that. And it was a really powerful experience. That was the first part. We then went into more details about high expectations, where we looked at understanding that helping kids understand the connection between effort and achievement. Moving on into December, we typically don't have a December CARE meeting. We have a November one, but with our speaker having a last-minute cancellation, we flipped it over, and in December, we had a chance to get an update from our Achievement Imperative Task Force, as well as an opportunity for me to share some work that I had done here in the district several years ago with respect to our gifted Black students. And I connected it to student voice. And we really looked at, I'd worked with students, and I had videotaped them over time, where we looked at what were the specific needs of African American learners, looking at the Learn to Gifted kids. How are they the same as gifted kids, and what was different about their needs? Our conclusion was that what was different for gifted African Americans was true of all African Americans in terms of their culturally specific needs. So we took some time taking a look at that. One of those needs was around the kids' desire for Black history. And so moving into January, we looked at approaches to how we teach Black history, and we really had a planning session where our groups worked in groups to think about how do we plan for building level celebrations of Black history. And anchoring that was an article that for me provided a real aha moment in terms of the dilemmas of teaching Black history. And at the heart of that was really about two different approaches, where you have a survivalist approach or a catastrophic approach. And, without getting into a lot of detail, the catastrophic approach really focuses on the negative. And Black history starts with slavery. And my gifted Black learners shared with us the impact that had was not positive. And so as opposed to that catastrophic, there is the survivalist approach, where what you teach and what you focus on for Black history is about the positive, is about the celebrations, is about overcoming and resilience. And for students of color, that is a much more powerful message. And so we spent time in work groups in January, really taking a look at that. And I've been in contact via email with several of the buildings at the elementary level, and what's coming out of that, we'll share later on in CARE, but it's really some exciting and very different work. Moving ahead, you'll see our upcoming meetings. We're going to spend time talking about our community and police partnerships, as well as guest speakers for the upcoming months. As we have conversations about race and class and privilege, as you can imagine, it's not the conversations that you typically have at work. And so our 4 agreements for courageous conversations that we've had for years with our work with cultural proficiency is really what grounds us. And it's really helpful, in my personal opinion, beyond conversation, for any conversation that needs to be courageous. Could be around, race, could be around your bank account with your, in your family home, but it's about staying engaged. It's about speaking your truth, about experiencing discomfort, and most importantly about expecting and accepting that non-closure, that we're not going to solve it all today, but it is a long haul. And after 19, looking at 20 years in CARE, I can definitely attest to that. Our CARE Advisory Committee, our communities and parent stakeholders have a personal invested interest, as we all do, but these are our children and their children. And so we found over the years that it's important to have them as a touchstone to make sure that our meetings at RARE, our CARE, at our agendas, are moving in the right direction that suits their needs as well. And so we've met with about 3 times this year to have them give us input into the goals and strategies and direction of CARE. And finally, our vision for CARE. It's really about, a number of things, but really all moving in the same direction. Continue to organize guest speakers to inform our goals for the year. To continue to give a voice to the African American experience as a window into the lives of our families. For many of our administrators, this is a window. For some of us, it is a mirror. To connect these experiences to specific strategies and programs for students of color, to share resources with our administrators to inform program decisions, and also for them to share with their staff and department meetings. To share concerns and issues of CARE with other district initiatives, the strategic plan. Last year we had a chance to, for the first time ever, connect with ISC and do a presentation, and it was very well received. And so, our vision moving forward was to connect with other groups and organizations within our district. To provide updates from the task force, which Dr. Eveslog will tell you about in a little bit, as well as other programs that affect our underrepresented groups. And finally, to extend focus to all cultures in an effort to maintain cultural proficiency. Our look at the achievement gap goes beyond race, but it goes to socioeconomics. It goes to students with learning differences, language, and disengaged. And so our vision for CARE is to broaden our goals to embrace all of our students.
Thank you, Ms. Partridge. And I'm just going to transition and talk a little bit about the Achievement Imperative Task Force, which was started at Mr. Copeland's direction last January 2016. So we've been around for just over a year. And the task force was kind of formed to be somewhat of the action arm of CARE. There is some overlap of members between CARE and the task force, but I think we're still kind of working through this relationship between CARE, the task force, but it's been a nice addition and very, very action oriented. So I'm going to update you on some of the actions that have resulted from the task force and just a little bit of history. Just been around again for the year. I am the chair of the committee, but Lynn and I work together on both CARE and the task force. I appreciate all her commitment to the work. And we too meet monthly and have a combination of administrators, teachers, parents, and community members. Mr. Copeland started the task force by sharing a McKinsey report which talked about the impact of educational gaps and their impact on the economy, amongst other things. But it was a great kind of kickoff first read for us as a group. And we were charged with our mission being similar to CARE, but eradicating the discrepancy in student achievement, establishing practices and implementing strategies that are research-based, and meld our district commitment to cultural literacy with actionable steps. So that you can see the kind of the focus is action-oriented. And kind of interface with the ongoing sustainable responses that we have to student learning in the district. Our target population is not only includes students of color, but special needs students or students with economic or resource deprivation, or students for whatever reason, regardless of what subgroup they may be a part of, or their ethnic background, if they're disengaged, uninvolved, or disassociated. We hope that the task force can be of assistance. So there have been some subcommittees that have formed. Again, we have people that are members of the committee have kind of group themselves into these 4 categories: restorative discipline, jumpstart and on-ramps, in-school supports, and community engagement. And I'm going to talk about each of those. One of the things that we have focused on is they're literally creating, each of the subcommittees are literally creating action plans. So they're writing out action plans, and those action plans include SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound goals. The first subcommittee is restorative discipline. And restorative practices is a approach to how the school works with students. Basically, the theme of it is that students understand how their actions impact themselves and others. So it brings a really humanizing approach to not only like student misbehavior, it's not only about discipline, but it is about how we respond to students and how to help them connect their actions to how their actions affect themselves and others. So we do have a small group of staff that have been trained in restorative practices, and a small group at Heritage in the 9th grade team that's actually prototyping restorative practices. But that group is looking at ways to researching models for implementation and training of staff, and coming up with some common definitions and working definitions of restorative discipline, and also establishing metrics to measure improvement by looking at student data, not the student data that we just talked about achievement-wise, but data as far as like number of student discipline referrals and disciplinary consequences by subgroups, in the hopes that an approach to adopting a restorative model can reduce discipline referrals and contribute to a more positive and healthy school culture. The second subcommittee is really have a few different groups going on in it. Looks at jumpstart and on-ramp programs, and so Mr. Copeland introduced that language to us last year as a district, where jumpstart programs would be like previews of courses that students could be a part of prior to engaging in the course, to get kind of a little bit of a jump start or an advanced look at a course, in the hopes that that would increase their confidence level and success in those courses. And on-ramps were ways that students, for whatever reason, may be on track to be in a certain course and have opportunities for advancement in those courses. And we've looked at some on-ramps that we started last summer that we will continue, such as the 5th to 6th grade pre-algebra on-ramp and geometry opportunities for students that may not be in geometry to take geometry over the summer. So we do have those programs up and running for this summer, as well as the Summer ESL Academy, which is K through 12. The secondary STEM Jumpstart, which is growing off last year's relatively small program. We have a group of students, rising 10th graders, that will be getting a jump start on chemistry and algebra 2, and a second cohort of rising juniors that will get a jump start on pre-calc and physics. We're looking at a lot of data to help identify students that would benefit from either any of those jump start or on-ramp programs. And we're pleased to introduce an elementary STEM enrichment program this summer that will really the hope is that we just allow students to engage in really exciting and engaging STEM activities to get them increased interest in the sciences, STEM, and engineering. So we're looking at data to help identify students that would benefit from these programs, and again, establishing metrics to not only monitor success, but measure improvement. The hope here with these programs is that we have an increased percentage of students in higher level courses. We reduce the number of students needing remediation. We increase our diversity in our AP and upper level courses. That's data we track annually, and particularly in the areas of STEM, you can see the STEM focus, we have underrepresentation even more so in those courses. Our third of 4 subcommittees is in-school supports. And Chris Hall is actually heading this subcommittee, Chris Hall, principal at Welsh Valley. And what Chris is doing is engaging us in an activity called, that's considered, it's called a SWOT analysis. And what that does is looks at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And each of the schools is engaged in this, this exercise to help us try to examine what intervention strategies are being used across the district, where we can not only share best practices, but more systematize what support students are given regardless of what elementary, middle, or high school they go to. And our fourth and final subcommittee is our community engagement subcommittee. And so there are a lot of ways that we sometimes measure community engagement or parental engagement at events. Frequently that's a head count, and I think that's a very narrow way to look at engagement. So one of the ways that this subcommittee is looking at engagement is trying to arrange strategic issues-based family forums with, again, measurable expected competencies for participants. So for example, they might have a community event where we would invite parents to work on what are the skills that, what are some strategies that parents can use to have a really productive parent conference? What are some questions they could ask? What are some things they should consider? What data should they expect? What type of response should they expect from parents? So, you know, what another possibility is, what are some considerations when you're going through course selection at the high school? What are some additional questions you may ask? You know, what people may not know about possible on-ramps and so forth. So we're looking at engagement from not only from people being involved, but increasing competencies and advocacies in our families that help them be partners with us to improve student performance. This group is also engaged in a book study, and we have a representative from Bethel Academy that joins the task force, and we're trying to strengthen the connections with the Box Lunch and a Book program and the Bethel Academy to try to support those programs with the task force as well. It's a lot of talking for me tonight.
I can see you taking a deep breath over there, Dr. Emerstein. Thank you again for the presentation, and a very nice compliment to the work around the school performance profile. So I'll open it up to questions from the board at this time. Yes, please, Mr. Driscoll.
Again, thank you both for this presentation. I guess I'll pick on you, Scott. The Jump Start, that to me, is that a relatively new thing? Like we didn't, like last year or two? And then what issues have you run into that may have made it harder for kids to do Jump Start that we're trying to get more involvement in for Jump Start? Since it's, I think, a relatively new program, a learning curve to it.
It is new. With the committee starting last January, we did try to get a Jump Start program up and running last summer. We ended up having about 6 students that were engaged in the program out of 20 that were invited. This was the rising 10th graders Chem Algebra 2 Jump Start, so that's the only one I'm talking about. Yeah, last summer. Yes, we did identify some challenges. One was invitations to students earlier when they're just as summer school brochures are going to be out this week. There's going to be summer plans made, and last year some of the timing of the invitations wasn't optimal. We're way ahead of that this year. And so that, coupled with, one of the aspects of the Jump Start is there's not a tangible reward at the end of it. You don't get, students don't get credit. They don't get a course advancement. I feel really good about the experience they had. And so part of this, I think, is just gaining some momentum and social talk about the programs and how they can help students.
Dr. O'Leary?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about how to phrase this question because it sounds trivial, but I think it's really important. How has the participation been in some of the STEM extracurricular activities, or the more academic extracurricular activities? And the reason I say that is because sometimes what you do with your peers forms your identity more than what you do in front of a teacher. And so I'm wondering if we have Jump Start programs for, I know they wouldn't be called Jump Start, but is that something we're also working on? And I'm thinking of things like robotics and TSA and things like that.
Well, one of the hopes of the elementary STEM enrichment program is just to do that, to try to attract students that that we see as potentially having a lot of interest or a greater connection to involvement. I mean, strictly from a head count, and I don't think that's a great way to measure it, but our secondary STEM enrichment programs continue to thrive, and enrollment, like our TSA and robotics and Science Olympiad, continue to be groups that we're very proud of and have really high numbers. When we look at that critically, we don't always have the diversity that we would hope in those groups as well. And so, I think that one of the hopes of these programs is to get more students involved. I mean, I don't think this isn't even there's some other complementary programs that aren't necessarily fall under the task force, but the Lmsb group, the National Society of Black Engineers group, that works out of both high schools, goes to multiple elementary schools and works with kids after school about that. And they do some really neat hands-on activities. And I was just actually speaking with Nate Banto this week about starting a middle school chapter of Lmsb as well, which I think can only help, because that group travels with partners with the students from Villanova, and they travel to multiple universities around the area to compete. So that's another great opportunity.
Stephen Jose Hansen is the director of the Brain Research Program at Rutgers University, and he was a principal author on a data mining paper about the issues of peer spillover in terms of the achievement gap. I was a co-author. I shared that with the board, but clearly you didn't read that, Dr. O'Leary. It was a fascinating paper, but I'll get you another copy on that.
Okay, let me just say, I'm the first one to read all the stuff that you send. Those big, thick books that I read on the beach, they're on education.
I'll get you another copy.
Dr. Gilbert and then Ms. Ackman.
Yeah, I just want to thank you again, both of you, for the presentation, which again, we also discussed at the curriculum meeting. So, but I was wondering, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is just the relationship of all this work to the strategic plan and sort of, this sort of rich history of work that's been done in the district and kind of carrying that forward as we, have thought through our strategic plan and are working to implement it. And one of the things I was thinking, and kind of piggybacks on what you were saying, Maureen, was, the strategic plan is really talking about student-driven schools. And clearly, this is all about student-driven schools. And we've been thinking about ways to sort of, include students as we sort of think through the strategic plan. So I'm just wondering if you can either talk about ways in which sort of maybe thinking through how students might be more involved in this work or already are, or ways of expanding that in some of the ways we've been talking about, I think, across the district.
So I think two parts to that answer. From a programming standpoint, I do think the strategic plan has helped kind of guide our thinking with not only these opportunities, but the many enrichment programs and avenues that we're trying to open up for students across the district, from the maker spaces to the Genius Hours to the programs that, quite honestly, just connected to our previous presentation. Like, I'm proud that we are moving forward with all of those things. We're not looking to sacrifice any of those. So I'm really proud of that. We do invite students to CARE, and they've come for a couple really student-led presentations that they've done, one at the end of each of the last 2 years. There have been other times, quite honestly, that we've invited them and not crafted or structured the meeting in a way that would have been tremendously engaging for them. So that's something I think that we work through, but that is part of the conversation, both in CARE, more so CARE than the task force, quite honestly, but it's how student voice can be part of the meeting.
That wasn't meant as critique, it's just I've been struck, we were talking, Mr. Copeland had been talking about the fact that he had been speaking with some alums, and that was part of the sort of discussion about the writing program that we've been talking about, and I just, thought that was a really exciting way to bring in kids. And
it is,
so,
and we had some students last year. I think we could do better with that. I think we could do, I take that as a good suggestion. Yeah.
We did have a couple of students on the CARE Advisory Committee, so that helped provide some good insight.
Just quickly, I really like the speaker series and kind of bringing in tools to help teachers incorporate these ideas in different creative ways. And I have a very maybe simple, kind of obvious suggestion. But I recently, and maybe some of you have, took my 3 kids to see Hidden Figures. And we all, like, I had an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 13-year-old, and myself. And that movie just teaches so many lessons, no matter if you're a woman or a minority or you're the person in power who could choose to help people, break barriers or not. So maybe for next year, I mean, I could see it's a book as well, and the kids apparently watch movies not infrequently in their classes for all kinds of reasons. So there may be just a suggestion. This is actually, there's a lot in there to work with around these issues. So I could see, and I just saw, obviously different circumstance, but someone donated money to the Philadelphia School District. So like whole schools could go take kids to see the movie for obvious reasons. So just a suggestion, I think that could be a really neat teaching tool in this context.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I took my kids. It was a great. I mean, it certainly was a great movie. We did talk about it at CARE. We have a group of students from Lower Merion High School that are going, and we talked about the 10th grade. Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like everyone should. Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, please, Ms. Powell.
Ms. Porters, hi. Thank you for all that you have done and are doing and will do. I just was wondering, has it been thought about 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoons? For a lot of people is a challenge. I mean, and it might not be every other, but have you thought about having a meeting maybe every 3 months at another time?
Yes, and for the past, I can't say how many years, at least twice a year, we have meetings from 6 to 8. Now, is that the other time, or are you thinking?
No, I'm thinking another day.
Another day?
Yeah, and this is just, I'm selfish.
Yeah,
Wednesdays are horrible for me, period.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
I think it has traditionally been Wednesdays, but we're certainly, open, and it's real. One of our missions or visions is to really include more community members. So we're open to any suggestions in terms of a change in time or date that would accommodate people and make it easier. I know at elementary level, 4 o'clock is the magic time that little kiddos get off the bus. So it's challenging for our families at that time. But we are definitely not locked into any particular day.
And then I know, just to add to Mrs. Partridge's point, Ms. Pollard, last year we did, I know, at least one evening meeting. So, we try to accommodate particularly the meetings toward the end of the school year so that we can do some culminating conversations around the issues that were discussed across the board in CARE. And we've combined the Achievement Imperative Task Force as well. So we try to be flexible, but we, never have as much time as we would hope. So thank you again for the presentation. I'd like to open it up to public comment. If you could sign in with Ms. LaPera. And there's a 3-minute limit if you could let us know where you reside in the district.
I'm the only one here.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, boy, there's a lot going on. First of all, I agree with Ms. Pollard. Oh, Ruth Jenkin in Wynwood. That we're dealing with growth, not performance, not an opportunity to have proficiency in order to move into the job market. Not only do you need growth, but you need certain proficiencies. And I think that if we're focusing only on that one aspect, if you remember, a couple of years ago, I argued for the extended kindergarten day, which I'm very happy to see is still in existence. And that's where my big feeling is that this is where it all has to begin. And I was also thinking about a letter that might go out to the 4-year-olds before they come into the kindergarten, kind of listing some of the things that parents can do to prepare their students for kindergarten, knowing the colors and the letters and spending a little more time talking to them and maybe giving them some ideas about what books to read. I know that myself as a parent, my parents, we're all working. I come from an immigrant family. My parents worked until 10 o'clock at night. I don't think they ever saw the inside of any school that I ever went to. So anything that would come home would be something that they could at least take advantage of. The other thing that I feel, too, is one of the things that was talked about was the arts and the plays, and we talked about Build On, Ms. Pollard and I, that where is the diversity in these programs? And I think that maybe if we would charge some of the students who are already in these groups to bring in somebody that maybe they don't know, or maybe somebody that they think that would enjoy it, that's a little bit different than them, that would kind of bring a little more interest to the players or to the orchestra or to the to whatever clubs might be going on. The other thing, too, is we talked about that this is a student-driven curriculum, and I know that I was called into school one day with my son, at Harriton High School from his math teacher saying that he just wasn't getting any of this. And I said, I really don't understand this, because he is an avid baseball fan and he can do batting averages like nobody's business. And I'm just thinking that sometimes some of these programs are so abstract and they're so academic, they don't have any application to anything in the real world that these students are doing. And the other thing that I wanted to mention too, that I, as a teacher of history, I hated Black History Month because it was 1 month. And that was the end of it. And I included Black history and other histories all the way through the American history experience and even in the early European civilization. So I think that that I think when you talked about actions, that there are consequences to actions, but I also think that we need to think about how these students are thinking, and their thinking definitely affects how they feel. And how they feel affects their actions. And I think we need to spend more time talking to them. And that's why I like that me time that you have at the beginning in the elementary school, where they can talk about, did anything really sad happen to you today? It doesn't always have to be the happy-go-lucky, kind of thing. A lot of kids come to school very depressed, and those are the disengaged students that they're nice and quiet, they sit in the back, and they don't bother anybody. At least the students who get into trouble, you can have something to do with them, so there's no time remaining. That's my little spiel for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.